We have a very special guest in the program, so sorry we have taken a little bit long from the scheduled time. So, but now everything is sorted. So, so today's guest is Honorable Priyanka Radhakrishnan, and who has a lot to say. Like she's a Labour MP, and previously it was List MP, but now this time she has won that seat as well. So she's a Labour MP, and then more than that, she is having a portfolios of different ministries. So we will talk to that. And before I go into that, I would also like to highlight that she is a first Kiwi Indian minister in New Zealand. So she has made that history. So before I talk more about Priyanka Radhakrishnan's ministries, so I would like to invite her in the program. So she is here with us. So I would like to take Priyanka on board here.
Assalamu alaikum, Sana, and good evening to everyone who's watching.
Thank you so much, Priyanka, and many congratulations for winning MP seat and minister portfolios as well. So I have information of your portfolios, like Minister for the Community and Volunteer Sector, Minister for Diversity, Inclusion and Ethnic Communities, Minister for Youth, and Associate Minister for Social Development and Employment. So congratulations for having heaps of things in your bucket now.
Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Priyanka, for joining us today. I understand your week must be very busy in the Parliament, as we were seeing on the TV, like the Commission and State opening in Parliament. So thank you so much. And we are always blessed to have you in our ceremonies, in our events. And now I'm lucky to have you in my program as well. So
thank you. That's very kind. It's a pleasure to be here. So thank you for having me on your show.
And so, Priyanka, we will just go through quickly, because I know your time is very precious, and I have been informed it earlier as well. So I will just quickly highlight the key questions that our viewers would like to know from you. So the first thing, like, tell us about your ethnic community portfolios, like what it means and what are the responsibilities as a minister for ethnic communities.
Yeah, sure. I think, you would have noticed, and equally viewers might have noticed, that the name of the portfolio has changed a little bit this time round. It was, it's gone from basically, I would have been the Minister for Ethnic Communities previously. We've got diversity and inclusion in that at the moment. So that might be a good place to start in terms of what that means to me, or the way that I interpret that. For me, it's always been really important that we not only acknowledge the fact that New Zealand is incredibly diverse. We have, at the last census, about 213 ethnicities represented across Aotearoa. We collectively speak 160 different languages, and we've talked about that. And I believe that as a nation, we're strong because of that diversity and not in spite of it.
Yeah,
but
right.
We need to ensure that as a nation, we value that, those diverse perspectives.
Yeah.
We've grown in diversity in a very short period of time. So we need to look at how we value that, how we recognize diversity, how we ensure that people from all different communities, faiths, walks of life can feel that they belong as New Zealanders, and also that they are able to participate in our economy, in our society, and politically as well, at various levels of decision making. So for me, that's where the diversity part of it comes into play. The inclusion is about creating a society where that diversity can thrive. So looking at, from an equity lens, what are some of the barriers whether it's in employment, whether it's in the leadership space? How do we ensure that we get the outcomes for people from ethnic communities that are positive, where we can maximize our skills and our talents and actually contribute to New Zealand? So that's how I interpret this particular portfolio.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and you're right, like equity focus, we are seeing that statement, like I work in a health sector and we are seeing more focus on that statement. And I feel really good in that when I realize like we have a multicultural environment here, and people in the government realizing that fact. So and that's why I was so glad to when I heard that I'm interviewing Honorable Priyanka Radhakrishnan. So I said, oh, that's good, because very recently I have also gone through some ethnicity training courses for and realizing the needs, like why we need that. And so when you're holding this portfolio, that's why I have a lot of interesting questions for you to tell me.
Great.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
no, that's
yeah,
good to
so
hear.
that's
Because
good.
I mean, with the Office of Ethnic Communities, there'll be a certain number of programs or initiatives that the office can drive, but there will be a bigger program of work as well in terms of influencing the work of other ministries as well.
That's right. Yeah. So Priyanka, I'll just go through the list that I have received questions from the community. So one by one, and so I just make sure that I cover that. So first thing that have been asked, like, please share with us what diversity, equity, and inclusion mean. So you have given a little bit brief. So a little bit more on. So when we talk about the equity, what that actually means, equity to ethnic groups.
Yeah. So we talk often about equality quite a bit, and the fact that, we need to have equal opportunities. But for me, equity is more about the access to those opportunities. Not everyone has the same means to access opportunities. So, for example, simple example would be perhaps language as a barrier. For some people, English may be a second language. That could be a barrier to accessing employment
That's
or
right.
educational opportunities, or accessing health services as well. Equally, poverty is a barrier as well, and it keeps people from being able to access the same opportunities that in theory, exist for everyone, but access to it is difficult for certain people. And we know that certain groups within ethnic communities struggle to access the same opportunities that are there for everybody. So the way that I would look at it is that you're not just looking at whether the opportunity exists, you're looking at whether the outcomes are equal for everyone. And for some people, if their starting point is not the same as others, what do you do to support them to be able to access those opportunities? What barriers do you remove? So that's how I would look at it from an equity lens.
Yeah. And what about inclusions? Like what you get from inclusion? So when we talk about diversity inclusions, like in the society, so how do you see
Yeah. So I believe for us to be able, so the inclusion for me is the equity is the how.
that?
The inclusion, I guess, is the why in a sense. So if we were to acknowledge that we have this immense diversity of perspectives, of contexts, of thought, of ethnicity, of gender, everything that we bring that makes us um, different or unique as New Zealanders, how do we then, using an equity lens that I explained previously, how do we get to a point where our society is truly inclusive? So that is the process of removing those barriers. So, for example, discrimination. Discrimination exists in various institutions, and that's what I believe keeps our communities out of decision-making levels in virtually anywhere you look, whether it's a school board or a community board, our state sector boards. So for the first time in the last term, our government measured gender and ethnicity on state sector boards. We all know anecdotally that it's quite low, and measuring it gives us a baseline. It is low. So it was something like, I think from memory, it was something like 4%, or it might have even been a bit lower than that if you look at Asian and the Malay communities, Middle Eastern, Latin American, and African. So, but it's important that we have a baseline, because then we are able to measure progress,
Yeah, that's
and
right.
take the steps that we need to ensure that our state sector boards, that our public sector are representative of the people we serve. And so just to give you a very quick example, Parliament, our 53rd Parliament, is now the most diverse Parliament we've ever had in New Zealand. And that's important because we are meant to be the House of Representatives. So the decisions we make in Parliament affect the daily lives of people that we serve. So I feel it's really important that we are able to reflect the people that we serve, and we're doing it better now. Largely, I have to say, on the government benches, but we've got a huge amount of diversity, and I'm really proud of that. We need to do that everywhere. And so government has a role to play, but equally so does the private sector. We all have a role to play in this.
Contribute there. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So while you sing Honorable Priyanka, like we have diversity and we have more than over 200 ethnicities here. So when you're designing policies or the framework or planning for, so do you keeping that in mind, like how the different needs of different ethnic groups can be considered while designing the policy framework?
Ideally, yes. And I'm going to answer this a little bit carefully because I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. Ideally, yes, I would want everyone's views, various communities' needs and aspirations to be reflected as we design our policies. So for me, it's quite important that we that I design the policies that I lead with the communities and not just inform them of what we've decided or consult them at a point where there's no opportunity to then change what we're doing. So I feel that our communities have been consulted to death. And so we need to have a say in the way that policies are shaped as far as possible. Therein lies the challenge though, because with with 213 ethnicities, it's difficult to ensure that everyone is represented when you're, just the logistics of it, the sheer logistics of it. So that's something that I'm still thinking through. And if anyone has any ideas, I invite them to send them through to me, and I will consider them. Because one of the things that I've seen successive governments do is just to consult with the same people who are considered community leaders, or just the national organizations. And I know that as our communities grow, while those institutions, those organizations play an important role, they don't necessarily represent everyone. So I'm keen to get the voices of the people who aren't usually part of this process to be heard as well. I'm still thinking through how best I can do that.
Yeah. Now, through this platform, we would also request our viewers, if they are hearing this, and later on we will share this program with them as well to provide us some feedback on that. So then that can help you as well to design that kind of policies. Yeah.
That would be great. And email me at priyanka@parliament.gov.nz. It comes to me.
Sure. So the other very hot questions that has been said many times to ask from you is regarding offshore migrants who are stuck for more than 9 months now, or maybe more than that as well, overseas. So they have lost their jobs and financial issues. So what are you doing in that capacity, or are you thinking to do something to help migrants to make some improvement, either to return or to find jobs, or like what level of supports you are thinking to provide to them?
So the supports that we've provided largely to date benefit the temporary migrants who are here in New Zealand, and we've got a large number of them here as well. And so the Immigration Minister has made some changes to ensure that those who are on work those who are able to work in New Zealand here on temporary visas can actually find work in sectors that have workforce shortages. So seasonal work, for example, and being able to vary their conditions to get that work. There's also the Foreign Nationals Emergency Benefit that has just been announced. And I know this doesn't quite answer your question, but it might be useful for some people who are watching it. So those who are on temporary visas, again, student visa, work visa, and visitors, if they're in hardship, they've lost their job and they have no means to go back to their home country, from the 1st of December, they can apply for the emergency benefit in the same way that New Zealanders or permanent residents in hardship can apply for that. And that's because the program that currently to date has been offered through the Red Cross will end tomorrow. So that's why this provision has been put in place by the Minister for Social Development, by the government largely. Now, in terms of those overseas, the challenges remain the same because the border is closed, unfortunately, as a result of COVID, and it needs to remain so because COVID, the pandemic is getting worse overseas. We're seeing other countries go back into lockdown, and that is not a place that we want to be in. So the border will remain closed, except for New Zealanders, permanent residents, and those who have a critical need to travel to New Zealand. I totally understand the yeah, the place that those who are stranded offshore are in at the moment.
Yeah.
But the reason that we can't just extend visas is, as people have asked for, or allow them back. I think I've addressed why we can't just open the border. But in terms of extending visas, the labor market has changed significantly as a result of COVID. So we've had over 50,000 New Zealanders come back to New Zealand. There are areas where jobs just don't exist the same way that they existed pre-COVID. So just extending visas is, I feel strongly, just raising people's hopes and expectations where their job might not even exist anymore, or might be filled by someone who's come back to New Zealand. So it's an incredibly complex space, and it's one that we need to deal with very carefully. Towards the end of the last term, the immigration minister had announced a few changes. For example, those who have resident visas who are stuck offshore and can't make it back to New Zealand to fulfill the criteria for their visa to become valid, that's been extended. Certain migrants stranded overseas who still have a job here can show connections to New Zealand. We've started opening up the border a little bit, to balance the needs that we have here in terms of workforce shortages, and also to allow them to come back. And so we're doing the government's doing what we can to address those issues of people stranded overseas, but we have to be incredibly mindful of public health and safety here in New Zealand from a health perspective, but also the fact that the labor market has changed and is continuing to change as people continue to come back.
Yeah, that's right. And my next question is relating to that as well, and that's because you also mentioned many New Zealanders are returning back to home now, and so that's another challenge for ethnic communities as well and immigrants. So how are you seeing that? How are you analyzing that challenge? And because I am sure, like as you mentioned, like many organizations within New Zealand are also going to restructure kind of stuff, and people who are offshore, they may have no jobs available here when overseas people are coming back, like New Zealanders with more skill sets. So what are the challenges that you are anticipating for the ethnic groups, and what are you thinking to minimize that?
Yeah, well, I think I've explained the rationale for how we'll be dealing with this going forward. It's not going to change. Public safety and public health will be the topmost criteria for the New Zealand government, and that's why we've done so well. To date, there was a report just out last week that put our response to COVID pretty much at the top globally, and that's because of the cautious approach that we take to protect the lives and the livelihoods of those, of New Zealanders. And so the health safety, the border will only open when we know it's safe enough to do so. The same goes for travel bubbles as well. So when it's safe to do so, we'll move towards that. What we want to do, our focus here, is to start rebuilding and building back better in New Zealand. So creating jobs in New Zealand, which will, benefit everyone, including those from ethnic communities here, to be able, so partnering with the private sector in terms of infrastructure rebuilds, our commitment to build 18,000 more houses over the next 4 years, our transport commitments as well. All of those will create jobs and stimulate the economy here. In terms of those of temporary migrants coming back, what I outlined in terms of a strategy will continue. It will still be based on the labor market and shortages that we have here, combined with capacity at the managed isolation facilities, which are full again, as well as people come back for Christmas also.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Honorable Priyanka. So I have one question from Naveed Hamid, PANZ President. So he's asking, Honorable Minister, please let us know how you're going to manage offshore conflict between different communities settled here, and how you're going to minimize impact on inter-ethnic relationships.
That's a really good question. And I think we've seen a little bit of that already. For me, in terms of, the New Zealand government's response to what happens overseas in other countries, whether they're human rights violations and they're usually around human rights violations, we've always maintained an independent foreign policy. We've always had our Prime Minister and our Foreign Minister speak to their counterparts in various countries when we don't agree with certain things that have happened. I would expect that would continue. In terms of then managing how our communities here, and I know that, you know, for many of us who are newish or, you know, of my first generation migrants to New Zealand, we still have connections, we still have family back home. For me, the safety of people will always be paramount.
Yeah.
And so if communities here have a safety concern because of what's happening overseas, I'll always stand for that and ensure that, you know, I raise it in whatever capacity I can. In terms of tensions between ethnic communities, whether it's because of what's happening overseas or any other motivation, we would deal with it in the same way and try and diffuse it, because that's not conducive to social inclusion from my point of view, my perspective.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you.
I hope that answered his question, but it was a really good question.
Yeah.
Again, open to hearing people's views on that as well.
Okay, cool. So I have one question regarding 15th March. There was more attention towards Muslim inclusiveness and integration. So how your ministry will be making sure that minorities are provided equal opportunities?
Yeah, so we've taken a few steps already. Of course, 15th March was pivotal, because we've never seen an attack of that scale that was directed towards one particular community. And of course, that sparked the Royal Commission of Inquiry into the Christchurch mosque attacks, the report of which has just been released last week and will be tabled in Parliament on the 8th of December. So that report will contain a number of recommendations that government will take, you know, will consider seriously and respond to as well after it's made public. So I just want to park that there, but to give people the reassurance that it is a report that will be taken incredibly seriously, because the Royal Commission inquiry is the highest level of inquiry that we can have. Are you able to still hear me? I can hear some interference.
Sorry?
Can you still hear me, Sana?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, there was just some interference and I couldn't.
No,
I'll get back to what I was saying now. So I just want to park that. Yeah, no, it wasn't you. I was just concerned that you couldn't hear because of the interference. Anyway, so I just want to park that, but to give people reassurance that that will be taken incredibly seriously and there will be a response to it. Immediately after March 15th, there were a number of initiatives that our government put in place. So 1.4 million that was put into Muslim community groups and projects and activities that build connections for Muslim and non-Muslim communities through the Ethnic Communities Development Fund. There was a boost to the Office of Ethnic Communities more broadly in terms of resourcing, and also to ensure that there were specific positions that were created in Christchurch to work with victim survivors post March 15th as well. A whole host of dialogues that were co-hosted with, you know, the former minister, prime minister, with imams, Muslim leaders across New Zealand, with specific dialogues for Muslim women, youth, to ensure that government got a range of voices in terms of what needed to happen as well. Along with interfaith hui that happened, 7 million through the Safer Communities Fund to improve the safety of both mosques and synagogues as well, both being that needed particular upgrades to security arrangements to ensure. And then all the other changes that happen in terms of the gun legislation and so on to keep our communities safer. So quite a bit of focus on both how we can support Muslim communities across New Zealand better, what specific needs have come out from those communities as well. And so we've moved on some of those, but I think the Royal Commission report will have the most substantive recommendations for change. But regardless of that, I think there is a fair bit of work that we need to do from that inclusion perspective that I spoke about at the start. So we've made a start, but there's more work to be done.
Thanks, Priyanka. There was so I know your time is very precious, so I just try to quickly wind up the program, but I have a second last question. So especially for Auckland, like we're seeing like ethnic groups are more settled in Auckland. So are you thinking about infrastructure or the facilities across the other regions? So then you can, like the ethnic community can spread across. So because whenever a new person or migrant is coming, they settled in Auckland. So because we don't have much infrastructure or that kind of job market, like if I'm based in Hamilton, so I can see not many job opportunities for like skilled people in terms of like IT infrastructure or that. So is that also in your focus when you're designing
Yeah.
policy?
Yeah, so the whole focus of the Provincial Growth Fund, the PGF, in the last term was to ensure that we invest in the regions in provincial New Zealand, right from that perspective in terms of job creation, supporting infrastructure
Yeah.
across various sectors, so that we create jobs there and migrants don't feel that they have to be stuck in Auckland. Because you're right, 75% of ethnic communities live in Auckland. So we do need to incentivize the regions, and that includes job opportunities, that includes access to housing, and also, the more social infrastructure rather than just the physical. That's important as well. But we also need to look at how we develop social infrastructure,
Yeah.
because last I think it was last year or the year before. So in the last term, when I was the private secretary to the Minister for Ethnic Communities, one of the things that I did was to make sure that I went out to the regions, because our communities are growing there. And when I went to the Hawke's Bay, I have to say, surprised to learn that they had 62 different ethnicities represented in the Hawke's Bay. So I think it has already grown. Our communities have
Yeah.
grown in the provinces as well. But again, we do need to need to focus a bit more on incentivizing it.
Yeah, that's right. And you're right. Like it's not only provide, it's building infrastructure for that. So their social needs or all type of things can be met. Not only they can go and they can stay there. So
And feel comfortable and feel that they belong.
exactly, and especially like their psychological and social needs are being met there, so they feel that safe in that environment. So yeah, and I think that's with growing population of New Zealand and ethnicities. So it's good to have that like transparency across the region, so people can make that decision. Oh yeah, it's good to go there as well. And so before we just close our program, I just want to hear your last words or advice that you want to give to the ethnic people or the people who are watching this program, not only in New Zealand, across the globe. So people are watching. So
Yeah.
what is your advice or the
I don't know that I have advice necessarily, but I just want to
or,
acknowledge, as we come to the end of the year as well, that it has been a really tough year for everyone. It's been tougher for some, those who have lost loved ones to COVID, and we're hearing that a fair bit now again as well, particularly overseas. Those who have lost their jobs, those who are stranded overseas. It has been incredibly tough. So I just want to acknowledge that in the first place, and say that, you know, that the New Zealand government is doing all that we can to ensure that people are safe, and that people, people are supported as well, as
yeah,
much as we can do. And we won't be able to do everything, but we absolutely are committed to ensuring that people feel safe, that they feel valued, and that they feel heard as well. So I guess my final thing that I'll just put out there is really just a call for people to get in touch and tell me what they think is important to them as part of the engagement that I do as the Minister for Diversity, Inclusion and Ethnic Communities,
yeah.
and the other portfolios as
This is
well.
really good, Honorable Priyanka, that you have said that, because it's like that's a leader. Like when you hear the people and you make policy by hearing that, rather than you thinking like this is what needs to be done. So we
Yeah.
through our platform we will keep asking people to get in touch with you and let you know that what are the needs, and so like there may be a short kind of survey that will help you to design your ethnic communities framework, like okay, what people needs and from different ethnic groups. So thank you
Yeah,
so much for
if you do
yeah,
that across your members here, across
yeah,
New
yeah.
Zealand, I'd be really keen to see what comes out of that.
Yeah, no, definitely we're gonna help you on that. So yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we always
Yeah.
feel blessed to have you in our event ceremonies or in event programs. So I think you also already had few programs with Asim Mukhtar. So this is the first time that I'm having you in my show, and I'm really glad on that. So thank you so much for
Yeah,
giving
thank
time.
you. Thank you. I've really enjoyed talking to you as well. And it's always a pleasure to come to PANZ events too. So thank you.
And we look forward to working with you through this platform, or definitely going to help you while designing or while you're doing work in different roles, like you have different portfolios now. So that
Mm.
all comes under ethnic communities, but they have like, as I mentioned, different names now. This time they have changed as
Yeah,
well.
so the diversity, inclusion, and ethnic communities have changed, but the others are quite separate portfolios, the
Yeah.
community and voluntary sector, youth, and the associate role. Yeah.
I will definitely invite you again in the program when you have a little bit more time in the role. So as you have just started this role, so I'm just giving you enough time. So hopefully we will see you soon
Thanks.
again. Thank you
I
so
look
much.
forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
So thank you so much for viewers watching this program today. And we tried our best to bring all the questions that you have submitted to us. And if I haven't covered anything that you want to ask from Honorable Priyanka, so just let us know. So, and I will definitely get in touch with her to get your answers. So thank you for watching this program today. And hopefully you have known that what you wanted to know. So, and we will see you in another episode of Insight with PANZ. So stay with us. And if you have any questions regarding the program or any feedback, so you can send us or you can email us at panznz@gmail.com. So stay blessed, stay happy, and stay safe. Allah Hafiz.